Hey, it's Kaylee. You know me as the Parts Girl, and I work here at PartsEdge. Thanks for following this awesome journey as we highlight thought leaders and trailblazers, share best practices in fixed ops, and cover success stories of how dealers sell more parts and service. This is the PartsEdge podcast with Kaylee Filio.
The challenges with the DMS are really the ability to creating a source there. That's like a three-prong question. Number one, most DMS systems treat a source like a dirty 6-letter word. And, the more sources you create, the more things that they have to try and manage for you. We've had DMS, for lack of a better term, DMS experts who've gone into some of our clients and they see 50 or 60 sources and they just go, this is absolutely nuts. We don't know how you could ever control these. Well,
Before you go into that, can you talk through what, just kind of basic, because I know each DMS is a little bit different, but like for a parts manager that doesn't really know all the different things that a source does, can you talk through like the top, or what is all included in a source? What do they do?
Well, what's included in a source is your day supplied, your phasing criteria, your accounting, especially when you get things with different asset accounts like gas, oil, and grease and tires. And probably the most important anymore is, especially with stock replenishment programs, is pricing. If you have menu priced items and you want to isolate those, you really have to have a different source. That doesn't seem to be that big a deal. But, like when you're dealing with a source, and I'm going to use CDK as an example, there's 12 different things you need to look at. You need to start it and I'm just going to rip through these,
Do it.
not that anyone should pay attention or write them down, but, you build the source in a program called MSSO. Then to set the day's supply, the phasing criteria, whatnot, you go into IRO. Then you got to go in, if you're going to apply a matrix or whatnot, you got to go into SPB, set up price break escalators. And, I want to have some special pricing. Maybe you got to go to OSPC, for price codes. And now, is there any special source accounting we need if you have multi-franchises under the same -I, or if it's tires or whatnot? Now you have to go to OSSA to set up your counter ticket source accounting, and then you have to go into service to update source accounting based on labor types there. So the biggest failure for most parts managers in their fear of adding a new source to their system is it's just not as easy as, I want to copy this to this. And, it takes some work. And parts managers, a lot of times, they will build a source and then it fails miserably because they missed one of those steps.
Yeah.
And so then they just revert back to it, or they try and get, an expert from CDK or whatever to get it set up. And, then we turn to TecHeon, and I bring up TecHeon because they're new and they've got some pretty decent stuff, but we've gone through 4 conversions so far with TecHeon, and they were moving from System A to TecHeon, and TecHeon would copy over the sources, but they put no phase-in criteria, no phase-out criteria, no day supply setting. It was absolutely terrible.
That's what's important about sources, because you can have different day supplies, you can have different phase-in criteria.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. And so, Reynolds, ironically, you can copy a source. If you want a new source to match an existing source, you can bring up the existing source in 2323, and down at the bottom, you do copy and create your new source number. At least that pulls over your matrix and your settings, and then you can tweak it And then you have to go into 2565 and add all your price codes. Okay. So to me, creating a handful of sources in Reynolds is much easier because the only thing you have to worry about if you copy an existing one, it pulls everything over, is maybe you tweak your day's supply or phasing criteria, but you got to go into 2565 and add your price codes to each one of the new sources you create. And that tends to be the easiest of the DMSs that we work with trying to, do that.
But once you set up some sources, let's say a parts manager, had 5 and they set up 5 more, so they're managing maybe 10 to 15 sources.
Yep.
Sources, they're not supposed to be just set it up and just let them. They don't the parts don't automatically just magically end up in the right place, right? Everyone has to remember where to put. So that's another, I think why I get challenged is like, well, we have to remember where to put all these parts, you know, without a solution like PartsEdge because that's a lot of work.
Well, one of the number one questions we get all the time, and this gets back to the source accounting end of it, and this is just a failure of the DMS vendors. And with technology this day and age, I've never understood why. You get this one default source. When you set it up, you have to pick one default source that it falls into. Okay, let's say it's source 100. So many of the dealers, when we go in and we see they have less than 10 sources, it tends to be their default source, the catch-all. When you add a part number to the system, it goes, go to this source. And if you're adding a tire and that needs to be isolated for source accounting and pricing and fee codes like tire tax and tire disposal fees, like most of them have now, you got to get that into the right source or stocking group. On Dealer Track, they call them stocking groups. But what typically happens, and we go through this all the time, talking with controllers, parts managers, FODs, whatever, they all of a sudden the office says that they have $20,000 in tires, where in reality they have $10,000 in tires. And the reason being is the parts manager codes it to the right tire asset account, but the counter people, they added it and sold it out of that default source, so it came out of the other asset account. So if you're $10,000 over in accounting, because they put it in there, but it got relieved out of the other the standard asset account, now that's going to be 10,000 short. And when they do physical inventories, the controllers, CFOs, they end up having to GJ this all to correct it again. And so that doesn't matter how many sources. You can have 3 sources, one standard one for tires and one for gas, oil, and grease, and it would still happen because you got that one default source. And it typically happens with tires because they typically add and sell them on the same day. And even if the parts manager moves them tomorrow, through a PM batch or whatever, and moves them into the tire source, they are added and sold out of that default source, the damage is done. So that's where the fear of having multiple sources created. Most dealerships, when we go in there, we see about 6 to 8. And, you got the standard one, you got one for special pricing, you got one for accessories, tires, gas, oil, and grease.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the problem is, once you have all of these, the asset accounts might be one thing, but for accessories, nobody matrixes accessories. If you do, you don't sell them. So you want to isolate accessories and set them to a standard retail, a straight list. That would be one pricing example. The menu price items, you want to sell them at a fixed price. You need to isolate those in a source so that they'll sell properly. And a lot of parts managers have just never really been educated how you can do that on these systems, but they all have that ability, and it works really slick when it works. What you want to do, and that's why I bring up if you create 15, 20 sources and get it to do what you want it to do, Now the DMS is doing the work for the manager instead of the manager working around all the DMS pitfalls or their lack of understanding. Breaking it out in sources would save them so much time that, why wouldn't they? And there's no real education process, Kaylee. That's, I guess, why we exist and probably will for a long time, because the DMS vendors, they look at anybody over 10 sources and they freak out. They go, "Are you crazy?"
Let's talk through that a little bit. You going back however many years of when you helped or started designed PartsEdge, that was the core of it, right? You as a parts director was you were looking at a way to be more proactive with the way you were controlling your inventory, and you saw an opportunity with setting up more sources, but you knew that would be a lot for the DMS and for you to keep up with. So maybe talk through, like, what are the parts managers missing? What are the DMSs missing? I'm trying to figure out the right question to ask you to pull this from you.
Well, once I really, and even until I started PartsEdge and we came up with a lot of the filtering and automation and stuff that we run, I had about 20 sources. But one of the things, once I really discovered and nailed down exactly everything I had to do to create a source properly for what I wanted it to do, uh, at that particular point, I would run a few English statements or so forth because I was CDK, and I'd say, "Go show me all my tires, not in tires or whatnot." And we made sure they got moved to the right source. Controlling special orders, having a source that we put all our outstanding special orders in, made it really easy to run reports. One of the things is I've done the seminars over the last 25 years with parts managers is I'll ask them to bring in their source table. Then I'll ask them what their pricing, if they got menu priced or whatever, which a lot of them didn't. But then I'd say, then I want you to bring in your override report. And this is a report that shows on the system where the sale price or the cost or whatever has been overwritten on a daily basis. And it's amazing how when they bring their matrix and their pricing schemes in and we look at it and, some of these freeze-dried matrices from 30 years ago still exist out there. They have like a penny to $2, escalate the cost 600%. Then we look at their override report and we see all the parts that fit in that escalator category literally all have S equal. And I'd ask the parts manager, "Why are your counter people overriding it?" And they go, "Well, we can't look, a customer in the face and tell them 10 plastic clips is going to be $40. So, I give them the ability to overwrite that down to a realistic price." And I said, "Just stop right there." I said, "Why don't you make it realistic so they don't have to override it?" And see, if you have a source set up properly with maybe multiple phasing criteria or something like that, what you want your people to do is manage the sale, not manage the sale and the sale price. And that's a reason for breaking down the inventory into maybe 15 or 20 sources instead of 5 to 10, is now it gives you the flexibility and you're able to manage the result. I had my system set up to the point, Kaylee, and I guess you could say I'm pretty proud of it, how it worked. But our override report every day was less than half a page. And usually it was aftermarket or other manufacturer parts for our body shop where we had the S equals or whatever. And my OE, because I set the pricing, I made it realistic that it wasn't ripping lifts off or whatever. Now, when I got the override report, I could very quickly go to that counter person if I saw it and say, "Walk me through it. What happened?"
It sounds like it wasn't just magic and you were like, "Oh, I need 50 sources." It was like a build. You built up to this structure and saw that this was achieving better results.
And some other examples, and you can use this thinking of General Motors right now with their CPVP QPO. quantity purchases, okay, is, you want to isolate all the CPVP parts in a given source and set the day supply or whatnot so that you control that a little more effectively. We used to have these things at Chrysler called express order. And so I would put all my filters in one source, I'd put all my electrical in another, and give it a little bit more days supply because I got volume discounts. So that's, a reason why you might create a source to break it out from the rest of the inventory is you got some quantity purchases that, potentially, hey, I'm going to go with a 45, 60-day supply in this source compared to a 20-day supply in my standard source. So that's where the day supply settings and the versatility really help you to manage your inventory by breaking it out. And I wouldn't say anybody, unless they have some way of automating it, should go past 20 to 25 sources.
Yep, that's fair. And just to wrap up, just kind of recapping for the sources, the number one reason for sources is to have different phasing criteria, different day supply settings,
Source accounting,
Yep.
special pricing, which you mentioned, but special pricing, like putting menu priced items in there so that they work correctly. Purchasing, having a different day supply, and going back to pricing again, having multiple phasing criteria. We used to go through a time, and we discovered this working with our Ford stores, that we would implement one set matrix from cost. And we had Ford dealers calling us up going, hey, we got the matrix and it's selling at less than what suggested retail is on our Motorcraft because Motorcraft had a higher profit margin between cost and list than the standard Ford parts. So what we did and they haven't done this in a long time, but we isolated, of course, the Motorcraft in their own couple of sources, and we did their matrix from list plus, like list plus 10, whereas the OE parts we did from a cost plus, so that they never sold a part under suggested retail. So having multiple sources like that means you could have multiple phasing criteria as well.
I also want you to list out too, because I think also multiple sources means better reporting. So what are the top reports that a parts manager should be pulling if they had some better sources set up? Because you
Well,
mentioned
everybody
special
has that.
orders.
Everybody has that standard catch-all, and that's where you have to, be a query expert in whatever DMS you work in to pull a report. But when you break them down by source, let me give you the perfect example. Special orders.
Mhm.
If you got a default bin location or a set of bin locations for special orders, you move all those parts into a special order source that says bin location like we use, SPO, with an on hand. We isolate those in a source, and all of a sudden, I want to look at my special orders and their aging on the special orders. I just have to go, give me source XXX, my special orders, and sort it by descending age. Makes it really easy. You just have to go, hey, we're making sure those parts stay in that source. And if they sell to zero, of course, you got to move them out. But, now, a QPO, all of a sudden you want to place an order for CPVP and you got to hit $10,000 to get a discount. You go in and you run a stock order on just that source because you got everything there. And you go, oops, I'm a little short. Go in and tweak the day's supply, up it a little bit until you hit it. So, once you have these different commodities or all the reasons we talked about, being able to run orders, run reports, and so forth makes it so much easier to manage your inventory more efficiently. One of the things that we haven't talked about, if you're on an ASR program like RIM or Aero,
Mhm.
is to put all your RIM controlled parts in a source and get them out of your hair.
Yeah.
Who cares? And the other sources you have left, now you can run a stock order on them just to see, are there some non-RIM controlled parts that we're selling that we need to replenish and run an order that way.
That's a good point because I think every manufacturer program is a little bit different, right? They have a certain set of sources that they like to have in the system.
With ASR programs, and sometimes I think with TecHeon so far, and it's just their lack of understanding. That's why I think TecHeon, when they've migrated a lot of these stores and never set up a day supply or a phasing criteria, they basically are very good at GM, and they figure, oh, GM dealers don't need a phasing criteria and a day supply because GM's managing their inventory, which is so far from the truth. There's a lot of stuff that they don't guarantee that they are stuck with. And that's even the DMS vendor not understanding how valuable having sources is on these systems.
Yeah. Well, I think if we continue to keep talking about sources and how important they are, maybe someone will get the message.
I get people who go, I'm fine with my sources. I don't want to expand on them. And typically, that answer usually leads to the fact that they're either very busy or when they created sources, it created more havoc. Instead of working the problem and making it work right, they gave up.
Yeah.
And they'd rather deal with what they got than try and make their job easier with a little bit of work.
It's almost like the mindset of like, this is how we've always done it. It's working. Let's not touch it. So it just kind of takes that open mind to dig deeper. And I think if you put in the work, then it creates less work in the future. Yeah.
Absolutely. Guaranteed.
Mhm.
A little bit of brain damage to get it to work right and being patient with the process. I think back to my CDK days in the late 90s. CDK came out with their SOR program, special orders. And I turned that program on and off 3 times because it failed miserably. And I just couldn't figure it out. So finally, and CDK at that time, they actually had this uh, fake inventory tape, which was really cool. And I played with it for about 3 months and I found all the pitfalls that I run into before. And so then I re-released it for the 4th time in 3 years. And that SOR program was the best thing I ever did, for being able to track special orders, allow the service advisors to look up special orders without calling parts or coming back to the parts department and all those different things. And it just, I had to be a pit bull about it. I knew it had to work and I couldn't really get the kind of training from CDK people. There was even some times where I found pitfalls in it. And when I called CDK, no one was educated in the process, but I found them. And once I turned it on and I trained my people and it worked so well and my special orders became so efficient, it was one of the best things I ever did. And it just took time and understanding the system and being patient. And it seems like this day and age, there's just not a lot of time and patience, when it comes to, trying to figure that out. And in some points, again, the education process through the DMS vendors seems to be seriously lacking. I don't think there's
Well,
that that's anything earth-shattering if you talk to them.
no, and I think it's too the fear of going and trying to make things work better and making it worse. I think that happens a lot too. So I think that's the perfect place to kind of wrap up of just letting everyone know that they can reach out to us or continuing to educate and try new things is the best
Yeah.
way to do it because that's how we improve.